I added asyncio.gather to my pipeline, and my latency went up by 1 second. Not down, up. I was making multiple speech-to-text calls using the Azure Speech SDK, and I thought that since Gather runs them concurrently, it should be faster. It was not, and the reason why is something most asyncio tutorials will never tell you. Let us go under the hood. You have 5 audio chunks that you need to transcribe all at once, so the obvious move is to send them all at the same time and wait for the results, which is exactly what Gather promises. You pass in 5 coroutines, it schedules them all, and you get back 5 results. It looks like parallelism, and it feels like parallelism. 5 calls going out at the same time, the slowest one sets the total time, and you are done. That is the illusion, because Gather does not care what is inside those coroutines. It just schedules them and hands control to the event loop. And the event loop has one job, which is to run one thing at a time and switch between tasks only when they are waiting. The key word here is waiting. If your coroutine never actually waits, the event loop never switches. So it just runs it to completion and then moves to the next one, sequentially every single time. The event loop is a single thread, not 5, not 10, just one. Its whole trick is that when a task hits an I/O operation, it pauses that task and runs another one. So when a network request goes out, it pauses and runs something else. And when a database query is waiting for a response, it pauses and runs something else. That is how you get concurrency on a single thread. But here's the catch. The event loop can only pause a task at an await point. So with no await point, there is no pause. If your coroutine runs from start to finish without hitting a single await, the event loop is stuck and cannot switch or run anything else. So it just waits for that coroutine to finish before running the next one by one, in order. You wrote Gather, but you got sequential. And that is exactly what happened with the Azure Speech SDK. The Azure Speech SDK is not an async library and was never built for a Python. Under the hood, it is a C++ SDK with a Python wrapper on top. So when you call it, it runs synchronously from start to finish on the event loop thread, with no await points, no yielding, and no pausing. Just a blocking call that holds the thread hostage until Azure responds. So when you wrapped it in an async function and passed it to Gather, nothing magical happened. Gather scheduled all 5 coroutines, the event loop picked the first one, the SDK call started, blocked the thread, and the event loop could not move. It just sat there waiting while Azure processed the audio, and only when that call finished did the event loop move to the second coroutine, then the third, then the fourth, then the fifth. 5 sequential blocking calls dressed up in async clothing, and on top of that, you paid the overhead of Gather scheduling all those tasks, which is your 1 extra second. Let me make this concrete. Say each Azure STT call takes 500 milliseconds, and with 5 audio chunks, you expect Gather to run them concurrently. So the best case total time should be around 500 milliseconds, the slowest call. What you actually get is 5 calls running one after another. So 500 plus 500 plus 500 plus 500 plus 500, which is 2.5 seconds. On top of that, you also pay the overhead of Gather creating and scheduling 5 tasks on the event loop. That overhead is small but real, and it adds up, so you went from expecting 500 milliseconds to getting closer to 3 seconds. The frustrating part is that the code looks completely fine, with no errors, no warnings, and no hints that anything is wrong. Just a number that is higher than it should be. The only way to catch this is to know how the event loop works under the hood. In my case, I had no idea what was going on, so I started adding print statements with timestamps, one before each block and one after, old school debugging. That is how I found the 1 second hiding inside Gather. And now you do not have to go through the same thing. The fix is simple once you understand the problem. Stop pretending the Azure SDK is async, because it is not. Give each call its own thread and let them run truly in parallel, which in Python you do with a thread pool executor. Instead of passing coroutines to Gather, you wrap each SDK call in run and executor, and the event loop hands each call to a worker thread. Those threads run in parallel outside the event loop, so the event loop stays free. And now you actually get concurrency, with 5 calls, 5 threads, all running at the same time, so the total time drops to roughly the duration of the slowest single call, which is the number you were expecting from Gather in the first place. The irony is that Gather still works here. You can still use it to wait for all 5 results, but instead of gathering coroutines with blocking code inside, you gather futures from the thread pool. Gather does what it is good at, which is waiting and collecting results, while the thread pool does what it is good at, which is running blocking code in parallel, each tool doing its actual job. So when do you use Gather and when do you use a thread pool? The answer comes down to one question, which is whether your code actually awaits something. If you are using async native libraries like AIO HTTP for HTTP, async PG for Postgres, or AIO files for file reads, then use Gather. Because those libraries are built around the event loop, they yield control at every I/O operation. And Gather will work exactly as you expect. But if you are using a library that was not built for asyncio, such as requests, the Azure Speech SDK, or any blocking C extension, do not put it in a coroutine and call it a day. Wrap it in a thread pool and let the OS handle the parallelism. And if your work is CPU heavy rather than IO heavy, neither Gather nor a thread pool will save you, because that is a job for multiprocessing, with different processes, different Python interpreters, and no shared memory bottleneck. The rule is simple. Use Gather for async native code, use a thread pool for blocking IO code, and use multiprocessing for CPU-bound code. Get this wrong and you will spend an hour adding print statements with timestamps trying to find a 1-second ghost hiding in your pipeline. Asyncio.gather is not magic. It is a scheduling tool. And like any tool, it only works when you use it for the right job. The Azure Speech SDK taught me that the hard way. With 1 second of extra latency, a bunch of print statements, and a rabbit hole into how the event loop actually works. If this saved you that rabbit hole, drop a like and subscribe. In the next video, we are going deeper into the event loop itself, covering how it actually schedules tasks, what happens at an await point at the bytecode level, and why Python.execution is nothing like what most tutorials show you. See you there.